And hello, my name is Oscar Terrazas, and I can be contacted at Rev Oscar, that's R-E-V as in Victor, Rev Oscar at terrazasministries.com. That's Terrazas Ministries, that's T as in Texas, E-R-R-A-Z-A-S ministries.com. Well, this presentation, approximately a little less than 45 minutes, I will show some breaks you can advance, is a presentation on a theory that the Temple of God at Jerusalem could have been lined up to the sunrise of the equinox over the Mountain of Olives. Well, I know you heard about the Big Bang, but Big Bang implies chaos, like a firecracker or a hand grenade. Instead, what I want to show you is an orderly solar system that was noted and timed by God and also by the people who kept the timing of the calendar and the seasons, and that this astronomical timing is incorporated within the calendar of the Bible, or the one given to the Hebrews. So the first part is about some astronomy. So if you know about astronomy, I am going to cover how the equinox event happens and what is precession of the equinox. That's part one. Part two is the archaeological megalith buildings that many ancient societies through the years have noted this equinox alignment and precession of the equinox. And so this covers then the fact that the Temple of God could very well have been like another megalith building. In part three, the final part is the theory of how I believe the Temple of God could have been lined up to the equinox and the sunrise over the Mountain of Olives, and how this alignment could determine where the Temple of God would be today. So let us begin and pick your part according to the knowledge that you have. The slide that you see here is our galaxy. And our galaxy is not static, it is revolving. In fact, it is revolving at 230,000 years to make one cycle all the way around. So there on the left side, you see that little word in red, a sun. That is the location on one of the spirals of where our little solar system is. And in order to go around one time, it would take 230,000 years, which means that we are changing our position and our view of the universe. Our galaxy is 1,000 light years wide and about 100,000 light years long. And when we talk about light years, you got to put it in perspective. I know we say 186,000 miles a second, but that equates to 669 million miles an hour, or what light travels in 1 year would be 5.878 trillion miles. Or when the light leaves the sun to get to the earth requires 8 minutes and 19 seconds. And to get to Pluto is 5 hours and 31 minutes, or about 3.5 billion miles. We discovered that our little solar system and our galaxy is just one of many galaxies. In fact, the lavender dots that you see here are actually galaxies, just like our Milky Way galaxies. And this particular group happens to be about 5 million light years away. And we are part of what is known as the local group. Well, Jeremiah 33:22 said, "As the host of the heaven cannot be numbered, neither can the sand of the sea be measured." And this background is actually the Virgo cluster, which has about another 2,000 galaxies located within this group. Well, Job 9:9 says, "Which maketh Arcturus, Orion, and the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south." Now, it is believed by many Bible scholars that the book of Job is one of the oldest writings that we have, and that the Babylonians began to name many constellations and groups of stars, like the Pleiades, somewhere around 2500 BC. And Job could very well have been from that time. Well, they're already mentioned in the Bible, as we find here from Scripture. And the Orion then is one of the constellations that's beneath the ecliptic of the sun, which I'm going to explain. And the Pleiades is also known as the Seven Sisters. It was a group of 7 stars. The Japanese call it the Subaru. And so it was well noted in astronomical history and also in the Bible. The book of Job, once again, in 26, verse 13 says, "By his spirit he has garnished the heavens, his hand has formed the crooked serpent." Well, there's many that believe that this crooked serpent could be the constellation of Hydra. Well, there's another one that would be Draco the dragon. That would also be a crooked serpent. And it also contains the 3 main stars that are in the north, which serve as the North Stars when we are looking for travel and direction upon the seas and also upon the land. But in any case, I picked Hydra just to show you an example of what they could be mentioned in the Bible. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22 says, "He sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers." It would have been very well in the time of Christopher Columbus if the church would just have read the Bible. They would have realized that we are not dealing with a flat earth situation. Well, in the Big Bang, one of the things that happened was that all the planets were formed not just randomly, but actually on a plane, what we call the ecliptic plane of the sun, or the travel of the sun. So in other words, during the day, if you were to note where the sun travels in your sky, and you wanted to look for any of the planets in our little solar system, that's where you would find them. Even the moon. They would all be traveling on the ecliptic path of the sun. And I have it noted in various slides that I'm going to demonstrate. Johannes Kepler was a man who now we have known as Kepler's laws of planetary motion, in which he discovered that everything traveled in a certain time sequence, and certain events and times could be then noted just like a clock. And these then formulas was what we now base many of the NASA calculations, which of course have been improved, and we get it down much finer and in calculation. But nonetheless, NASA today has these calculations so that we know where planets are at any time during the day. In fact, I have a program for my computer that's called Starry Night. There's another one, I think it's Stellarium, that you can get. And my particular version dials back 9,000 years BC and 9,000 years in the future. And I can actually punch into my little computer program any city on Earth at any time going back 9,000 years and know the sky that they were looking at converted to the Julian Gregorian calendar, so that I know the sky at the time of the birth of Jesus. I know the sky that Moses was looking at in Egypt, and on it goes with this particular program. Well, one of the things that we want to speak about is the Earth tilt, 23.5 degrees to be exact. And the Earth is tilted, and it is not static, as I'm going to explain. And this particular tilt, as it travels around the sun, stays to a certain timing, but it actually wobbles at its tilt so that it's going like this. And it's taking 25,700 years to do one wobble. This is known as precession. The equinox is established as the Earth is traveling around the sun then, and at that moment in time when the Earth changes to the upper part of the Earth, the northern hemisphere, and then changes to the southern part of the Earth, the southern hemisphere, right in the middle is known as the equinox. That is when there's 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of nighttime. Equal day, equal night, equinox, equal night. Now this is important to note, because as the equinox then comes at 2 times during the year. It comes in March. Right now it's March 20th. And as it goes around the sun, then it gets to the autumn equinox. So one is the spring equinox, one is the autumn equinox. In the middle, you have the summer solstice. At that point in time, when it's the longest day of the year, There's 14 hours of daylight and only 10 hours of darkness. Once you cross the autumn equinox, it's equal again, 12-12. Then you get to the winter solstice, which right now is December 22nd. And then there is 14 hours of darkness and only 10 hours of daylight. So this event has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And this tilt then changes our view of the universe. It changes what we are looking at, and I'm going to explain that. So as the earth is traveling around, and so when we are dreaming of a white Christmas, then down in South America, they're having barbecue out at the beach, and Santa Claus is in swim trunks. So that is a concept that up here sometimes we don't note, but let's go on to the Bible. Book of Job again, chapter 38. Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons? That word constellations is the Hebrew word Mazaroth. There's some that believe that not only does it mean constellations, but it could also mean the zodiac, the 13 constellations that are on the ecliptic path of the sun. That's right, 13. There's Ophiuchus. We know now there's 13. Why it was left out by the ancients, we do not know. Many of their calculations are very accurate. But nonetheless, we have a static 13 constellations that we can see at the time of the equinox. We know exactly what constellation is out there. Then because of precession or tilt, then the view of what constellation we're looking at changes over time. That's why astrology don't work, because the constellation they were looking at back in the time of the Babylonians in 2500 BC is completely different than the one we are looking at today. So it doesn't work. Let me show you a slide that'll demonstrate this. And here you have then the constellations going all the way around. Of course, it only shows the 12, doesn't show Ophiuchus. And I point at March. And this particular one is pointing out at Leo, which I'm going to explain in a little bit. But let's see today's view. Let me show you one more slide so that you can see this. In today's view, with that tilt to the earth, at the equinox, the spring equinox, March 20th, we're looking right now out at the constellation of Pisces, the fishes. So you can understand a little bit of how this movement is as the time changes, as the constellations and our tilt is viewing different constellations at different times for the precession of 25,700 years. Let me show you another slide. Here in the middle then is the equinox, the spring equinox, let's just say March the 20th. Then it takes 3 months or 90 days to go to the north or to the left on this slide to get to the summer solstice, to get to the longest day of the year. Then it comes back 90 days and comes to the autumn equinox. Then it travels toward the winter solstice, December 22nd, and it takes 90 days to get out to there, the shortest day of the year. Stops, and as we're traveling around the sun, then it comes back 3 months later and gets to the spring equinox. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, total of 12 months in a year. That's how the cycle and the seasons are established. Because in the spring is the planting season, the summer is the harvest season, then the autumn equinox is the final ingathering, and then we go to winter where everything shuts down. So you can see this again one more time. There's the earth traveling around the sun, and it is marked at that point where the sun travels exactly on the equator, on the middle, and goes then from north to south and south to north. There's that point in the middle, which is the equinoxes. All right, so let me explain a little bit more how this happens on this next slide. What would Moses be looking at in, say, 1500 BC? What if Adam and Eve, that some believe was 6000 BC when they were birthed in the Garden of Eden, what would Adam and Eve be looking at on the day of the equinox? What constellation during their precession would they be looking at? And as this slide shows, they would be looking at Gemini the twins. That's about 6000 BC as the sun begins to precess on the ecliptic, that's that green line that you see there, and precesses and enters into the constellation of Gemini, the twins. Or we really don't know if it was two boys, two girls, or even could have been a boy and a girl. But it is interesting that some claim this was then the creation of Adam and Eve. So let me show you one more. What would then Moses be looking at during his time? Well, about 1800 BC, the equinox sun began to rise into Aries, the constellation of Aries the Ram. Now, I found that very fascinating again, because Moses was around 1550 BC. We're not going to discuss that topic, but nonetheless, during this time, the law was established, the sacrifice of rams and goats and lambs. Note also this was the time of the Greeks, and one of the symbols of the Greeks was the ram's head. And different constellations are different sizes. So it's not equal, like an equal pie, like the zodiac shows. It's not an equal pie. It is different sizes and takes different times. So it's going to take about 1850 years for the sun to rise or precess and travel through the constellation of Aries. So let's bring it down to today. So at 50 BC, 50 years before Jesus Christ was born, then the sun would have began to rise in the next constellation after Aries, which would be Pisces, the one we're in today. There again, I show the line, the ecliptic path of the sun. And in Pisces, though, because of its shape, it's a very long constellation. And it takes 2,500 years for the sun to precess or travel through this constellation. So I put there a yellow dot to show you where we are today. That's where we're at. And in about 400 years, the sun at the equinox will rise into the next constellation, which is the constellation of Aquarius. So all of these 2,000 years, we've been traveling through this constellation, or our view has been changing as we travel through this constellation. I found that fascinating. This is the time of Jesus Christ, where he made fishers of men, where the church was birthed. We're in the church age today. One of the symbols for the churches is the fish. So here we are traveling through the constellation of Pisces. This is now part 2. And what I want to show is the different megalith buildings throughout the centuries, the thousands of years, that the ancients have noted this effect. And so here we have the Temple of Culiacan in Chichen Itza, Mexico. And this temple is a step temple, or what is known as ziggurat. And there on the left side of the temple is a 4-sided pyramid. And on each side there is steps. And when you add up all the steps together and the top step, it is equal to the solar year of 365 days. But on this step, on the side, was then a mosaic of the serpent god. And on the day of the spring equinox, as the sun rises and the shadow is cast upon the edges of the pyramid, then the shadow is cast on the back of the mosaic of the serpent, so that the serpent, as the sun rises, it looks like it's traveling down into the earth. That's how precise it is. And by the way, every year they have a party. The hotels fill up and a lot of people go out. You can check it out on YouTube and actually see this event. The other one is Dilbilchultun, and this is in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. It's known as the Temple of the Dolls. And on the day of the equinox, and only that day, the sun lines up and shines through the portal so that the sun shines through the Temple of the Dolls. Up here in the north of the United States, we have the Bighorn Medicine Wheel, as it is called, up in Wyoming. And they finally figured it out, what it took these supposedly savage Indians that didn't know nothing, that when we put in then cement posts all the way around this wheel, it notes the equinox and the solstices. In other words, the seasons, spring, summer, autumn, winter, it is noted, and this one was built around 1200 AD, way before Galileo. Also up in Illinois is known as the Chioka Mounds of Illinois. And there on the left you see a hill, a mountain that they thought was hills. Turns out it was man-made. And all around this mountain or this hill, there was holes again. Well, it took a little time to figure it out, and they began to put posts in there, as you see in the picture. And the posts note the equinox and the changing of the seasons and the solstices. In Germany, they had something similar known as the Gocheck Circle. Again, there is portals, and on certain days of the year, the equinox, then the sun shines through these portals. Also in Stonehenge, one of the most famous ones, been argued and argued. I don't know what the argument is. We got all these other megalith buildings lining up astronomically. Why not Stonehenge? And sure enough, at the summer solstice, part of Stonehenge has been knocked down and we don't have all the complete circle. But the part that is standing, which you see there in the middle, then afar off, in a distance, is what is known as the heel stone. And on the day of the summer solstice, the sun rises exactly over that point. And if you want, you can YouTube it and look out there, and they have a party every year. They stay up all night and wait for the sunrise as they party around Stonehenge. Out in Egypt, we also have the Sphinx. Well, it turns out the Sphinx was built directly toward the spring equinox. That's right. And as the sun rises, the sun casts its light also upon the shoulder of the Sphinx. And when the sun sets, it sets exactly behind the Great Pyramid. So here's the part that's interesting. Well, what is this all supposed to mean? Can we use it? And the answer is yes. Because of the fact that we're traveling, we're spinning around our own axis. We're traveling around the sun every 365.24 days. Where our solar system is traveling around our little galaxy. And then we're precessing at 25,700 years. And our view is changing. And the constellations on the so-called zodiac are changing our view. So can we use it as a clock? And the answer is, of course, yes. So here's an archaeological find. What if the Sphinx, which looks like a lion even though it has a man's head, as many of the symbols in Egypt, what if the Sphinx was facing the sunrise of the equinox in its constellation? In other words, it looks like a lion. Well, let's go to the constellation of Leo the Lion, which is one of the constellations in the zodiac. And the answer would be, it would have to be 9,000 BC. They're dating the Sphinx supposedly around 2500 BC, 2800 BC. We know that it's been remodeled several times over the centuries. Even the Romans tried to restore it. Well, what if its core was facing the sunrise of Leo the Lion? Okay, then it would have to be 9,000 BC. And this is where we can use some of this timing in precession of the equinox. Let me show you just one more event. This is in front of our church. And in front of our church, I actually went out. Our church faces east. The face of our church faces east. So I stood in front of our church, and you can see there's some electrical poles. And to one side, both left and right, you'll see the sun coming up. And that is on the day of the equinox, on March 20th. Well, on the next slide I have here, then I drew a blue line so that I didn't have to deal with the sun in my camera. I drew a blue line to where the sun would rise. Note then the white arrow on the left side is some decorative rocks that we have. Note on the right side is a light pole that's in this picture. Well, on the next slide then is the summer solstice. So I waited 3 months, 90 days, waited all the way until the summer solstice, went back out in front of the church in the morning and took a picture of the sunrise. Well, notice where the rocks are, and notice now where the sun is rising. This is the effect of then dating and noting and marking the equinox. So let's go to part 3. And this is the part where I get into my theory. What does the Bible say about east? Well, Genesis 3:24. So he drove out the man and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubim. So it's facing east. Numbers 2. And on the east side, toward the rising of the sun, shall they of the standard of the camp of Judah. So there was 3 tribes to the east, 3 tribes to the north, 3 tribes to the south, 3 tribes to the west. Judah was east, and it was at the sunrise of the east. Ezekiel 10. And the cherubims lifted up their wings, and everyone stood at the door of the east gate of the Lord's house. So the reason the east gate was called the east gate is because it was east. Even the tabernacle of the wilderness had a direction. Now remember that Moses came out of Egypt and would have been schooled and instructed in all of the architectural and astronomy of Egypt. He would have known about the Sphinx and the pyramids, and he was right there when they were in much better condition. And so Moses would have known how to align something astronomically east, or to then line up the sunrise of the equinox. Let's look at another slide. This is what is known as Model City in Jerusalem. There's an area where you can go, and the whole temple area and the old city of Jerusalem was reconstructed in a model. And you can go and see it, so you can see what it was at the time of Jesus Christ. Well, note again how the gate is made, and how the temple of God, there in the middle, then faces east and faces through the gate. And this is one of my premises that I'm making, that the gate was more or less sort of like a football goal. And the bottom was a door, and it was constructed, and the top part then had a sight, sort of like a rifle, and it had a sight that you could line up then where the sun would shine, and shine so that it would then shine at the gate of the temple, or at the door of the temple of God. Let's go on with this concept. In this next slide, I show you a map of the modern city of Jerusalem. The square in the middle is the Temple Mount. That's where the Dome of the Rock is. And the square to your right, or east, is the Garden of Gethsemane and the Tower of Ascension, the place where it is believed that Jesus arose into heaven. Then to the left is west, and that would be the Church of the Sepulchre, where it is believed that Jesus Christ was crucified upon that hill area. It's now covered by a big church that's there, but it's the Church of the Sepulchre. And I drew a red line to show you how everything is aligned east to west, or west to east. There was a purpose and a direction. So in other words, Jesus Christ was crucified in the west, he was tried in the middle, and resurrected, ascended to heaven in the east at the Tower of Ascension. And I'm going to bring you to one of the theories of several professors as we go on with this. So in this next slide, let's get into some of those theories. There on the left, that building, the first arrow that you see is the Mosque Al-Aqba. The next arrow you see up above it is well, you can't actually see it, but this is then the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, and that's the plaza where as tourists we can go down there and pray on the wall. That's where the Jews are praying every day, 24 hours a day. Then the next arrow that you see is the small plaza area in front of the mosque. Then there's some steps that go up, and you go up to the next level, the next plaza area, which is the Dome of the Rock, which is the temple of Islam, one of the sacred temples. Then you keep going just a little bit, and it's very hard to see in this picture, but there is a small little dome there that's known as the Dome of Tablets, or the Dome of Spirits. Then if you go to the last arrow all the way to the other side, that marks the East Gate. And so this is where Dr. Hoffman then theorized that the Dome of Tablets was the place where the temple of God should be. Why? Because it was aligned to the East Gate. And I drew a thick blue arrow there going back and forth to show you that alignment. Now in the 67 war, there was a bomb that hit on this east side, and we know now that there's another gate underneath the current gate. And we know that the temple area has been filled in and built up by the very fact that the western wall and the area where they pray is more than 40 feet below this plaza area. So is this really the east gate? Dr. Hoffman assumed it. Nonetheless, he aligned it. And he even aligned it to the point where he believed that the sunrise then shined upon the east gate that would shine upon the door of the tabernacle or the temple of God. Only one problem. The problem is that it doesn't line up to any of the festivals. It might line up to Pentecost or might go beyond that where this gate is. Now, we also know from the scripture that there was 3 gates to the east, west, north, and south. Total of 12 gates, 12 tribes, 12 gates. There was 12. But note also there where the Dome of the Rock is, and right in front of it, there's another arches, if you can see it there, that is another east alignment. And this is geographical east. So what I'm proposing is this, and I have read Dr. Rittmeyer's work, his book, very scholarly. And he places then the temple of God where the Dome of the Rock should be. Well, believe it or not, there's about 15 more or less credible theories of where the temple of God should be. I want to propose mine, which matches up to a man by the name of Sevig. And he also proposed an area that would have been in front of the mosque or right at the bottom of the stairs that walk from the lower plaza to the upper plaza. So let's look at an old picture. There is some archaeological historical evidence. This picture was found, and in this particular picture, what is found is that the temple of God was much south of a position. That there was a fortress there that was in the middle. You see the arrow pointing to it. And then to the left, the very left arrow, is where the Mountain of Olives turns down. The next arrow you see, it is believed in many Jewish writings that from the Temple Mount area, the priest then would walk down to this bridge so that they wouldn't have to walk down into the Valley Kidron, this bridge that would walk across to the Mountain of Olives. Then up right there at the third arrow was where the temple of God was. And it is a much southerly position, about the position where the mosque would be rather than the Dome of the Rock would be. Next slide. Let's take a modern picture of this. So now I am standing on the Mountain of Olives and I'm looking down at a typical tourist position. I am looking down upon the mosque, Al-Aqsa. And I'm looking across the Kidron Valley. So the first arrow you see, I am looking west, and the first arrow you see is the mosque. And then the next arrow you see is where the western wall would be. That's where you take the ramp as a tourist to come up, and you open up into this plaza area. You can see now how big the plaza area would be, and this would be the third arrow. The fourth arrow then is where the steps are going up to the Dome of the Rock. So I'm on the Mountain of Olives and I'm looking then in the westerly direction. Next slide. This is a more of a geographical map that I made of the temple area, and the one to the left marks the Dome of the Rock. That arrow is where the Dome of the Rock would be. The next arrow you see there is the east gate. Then if you keep going to your right, the next arrow then would be the Tower of Ascension, basically the place where the east gate would align to where Hoffman had it lined up. Then that big oval is the Mountain of Olives, and on top of the Mountain of Olives there is a couple of landmarks, including the Hotel 7 Arches, which I'm going to point out to you. And then the bottom arrow to the right is where I believe then is where the sun begins to rise at the time of the equinox, which today would be March 20th. And I hope I made it clear that because of precession, then it would be different for Moses, according to our calendar, as it is today. So the equinox doesn't change, but our calendar changes. The way we mark our calendar changes. That red line that has going across is the line that would go from the sunrise to the plaza area in front of the mosque. So this is where the alignment would be. Now, precession would take then the sunrise either where I have it there, or right as it starts, as you start beginning to see the Hotel Seven Arches up on top of the Mountain of Olives. So let's look at that. Now I'm over on the temple area looking east. And I'm looking east, and there in the middle, you see an arrow going up to the top, is the Hotel Seven Arches. I don't know if you can tell the arches there. And then to the right would be where the sun would begin to creep up over the Mountain of Olives. In the middle, you might see a little blur there, and those are tourist buses. There's actually a road in the middle that takes tourists to certain sitting areas where you can view, which is where I took the picture from the Mountain of Olives looking down upon the temple area. So this is the view that you have. Let's look at it from a geographical perspective. This is the sunrise over the Temple Mount, looking magnetic east at Passover. So I'm going to propose, I originally proposed the sunrise of the equinox, but now I'm going to propose one other point. Due to certain studies that I've made, is that the sunrise could be at the equinox or 14 days later at Passover. And I'll explain why. And we're not sure because there's two theories and concepts here. But in this graphic, again, there that hexagon that you see there is the Dome of the Rock. And then right below it is a red rectangle, and inside of it would be the Temple of God. Now, there's an astronomical fact that happens. At the equinox, then you have a 90-degree angle to north. So east, you face the equinox. On that day, it is exactly 90 degrees to north. Split it for the solstices at 45 degrees, and guess what? You can triangulate then the temple. So, excuse me. And so here we have this alignment that more than likely had a gate. And the reason it could happen at the 14th, Nisan 1 would be the equinox day. 14 days later is Passover, Nisan 14. And that's because of the sacrifice of the red heifer. There is an archaeologist right now that's looking upon, that had permission to look upon the Mountain of Olives, that he is attempting to find the Mikvah altar, or the altar that would have been used to sacrifice the red heifer, whose ashes are required in order to purify the Kohen, or the priesthood, if the temple sacrifices were to be reestablished again for Israel, if the temple of God would be allowed politically to be constructed once again. So, we know that the current Hebrew calendar is based off Babylonian lunar timing. Anybody who's known the current Hebrew calendar knows that Passover changes throughout the week. The beginning of the calendar changes throughout the week. Rosh Hashanah changes throughout the week. It's a Monday this year, a Wednesday next year, a Thursday the year after, a Friday, a Saturday, unlike Jesus supposedly being crucified on Friday. It changes because of their lunar timing. In fact, the Hebrew calendar has a leap year in which they add a 13th month in order to reconcile the Babylonian lunar calendar to the seasons and the equinox. So here we have it. If we were just to align the temple then and the gate to the equinox, we could triangulate a temple area. I have a friend that I've been communicating with. His name is Brian, and he took some really good pictures, unlike I could do at the time. And he went on April 14th, 2012. He couldn't go up to the temple area because of the fact that it was too early. So he went up to the University of Israel and got up in one of those areas. They allowed him up there. So in this slide, what you see then is you see the Western Wall, the area where they all pray. You'll see also the ramp that goes up to the mosque area where they let the tourists go up. Then off in the background is the Mountain of Olives. The arrow that you see to the right is the mosque. It's pointing out the mosque. So here he is early in the morning, 22 days after the equinox. 22 days. So it doesn't take a whole lot to just move the sunrise back in its travel on the horizon. Just move it back to the equinox, or even move it back to the 14th day of the year. So in this next slide, then we actually got the sunrise. To the left then is the Dome of the Rock. There again in the middle is the Western Wall where they pray. And we got the sunrise in the middle. We got the arrow pointing to the Hotel Seven Arches. And we got the other arrow pointing to the mosque in this foreground. And in the background, of course, it would be very hard to see, so I had put an arrow there, is the Hotel Seven Arches. That's about where the sun would rise at the equinox. Notice then that if it was going to have an alignment to the east gate and the temple door, because supposedly the priest would go up to the Mikvah altar, sacrifice, and then show the sacrifice to the high priest standing at the tabernacle of God, the door of the temple of God, and he would see then the high priest at the door. That day, according to many Jewish writings, they would open the door and the sun would shine upon the Holy of Holies on the day of the equinox, just like the Temple of Dolls, just like the heel stone marking off the summer solstice of Stonehenge, just like many other megalith buildings that mark this event. The Jews and the Hebrews were not lacking. So therefore, on that day, the sun would shine as the door would open to the temple on the curtain of the Holy of Holies on that day, as the priest on the Mikvah altar would sacrifice the red heifer, or the yearly sacrifice in Leviticus 16 of the two goats. They would sacrifice one goat for the sins, and then they would pray over the other goat also, and they would release the goat into the wilderness. In other words, the backside of the Mountain of Olives. So here is my proposal. I propose that the tabernacle of God is more than likely where Tuvig Sevig placed it, in the plaza area in front of the mosque. And the temple would be aligned to either the sunrise of the equinox or the sunrise at the 14th day of Nisan, which would be Passover. That the sun would shine through the east gate, that would shine upon the door of the tabernacle, that would be opened at the day of the equinox and shine upon the Holy of Holies. I would request your opinion. You can send me comments. You can visit my website, www.terrazasministries.com. That's TERRAZAS ministries.com. And God bless you